Google taking a swing against one of its biggest cloud competitors, a company filing a complaint with the European Commission against Microsoft this morning, accusing the software giant of using anti-competitive practices to lure customers into its cloud platform, Azure. Here to discuss what's at stake is Adam Kovacevich. He is the Chamber of Progress founder and CEO. Adam, it's great to have you. So talk to me about this case. When you take a look at it, clearly you have this head-to-head going on between Google and Microsoft, not necessarily anything different than what we have seen in the past. But what do you think of this case specifically? Could it get some traction?
Well, I think we have to see. We think of Google primarily around search, but it is competing in cloud computing. But it's in the third place position behind Amazon and Microsoft. And so what they're doing in this case is a little bit of a turnabout. They're saying that Microsoft has had terms in its contracts, its cloud computing contracts in Europe, that lock in customers, that make it hard for competitors to get traction. And you have to remember, European competition law is much more complainant-friendly than American law. So this could get traction. It's also not a new issue. Microsoft had settled a similar complaint a few months ago in Europe, and several regulators across Europe have looked into this issue. They've identified some issues with Microsoft bundling their cloud and their enterprise software and raising concerns about some of their restrictive licensing practices.
And so with that in mind, I mean, what is the likely outcome from this in terms of some of the damages that could be brought forth?
Well, the EU process tends to move kind of slowly, and so this is probably a multi-year item to keep your eyes on. I would also say, too, the European antitrust enforcers tend to focus on helping small challengers against big tech, rather than helping big tech companies against each other. But on the other hand, I mean, one of the things that's interesting about this is that if you say you want more competition, then having three strong players is probably more realistic than, propping up some small European cloud provider from nowhere to compete. So it sort of tests what European antitrust enforcers really care about. Do they really want to foster competition, or are they just about helping, European companies?
Adam, is this reminiscent of what we've seen in the past when the two have gone head-to-head? And I guess, what have we learned from some of those settlements, maybe, and what that tells us about what we could see as a remedy here?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a Cold War that's gone hot between Google and Microsoft for years. Microsoft has been an antitrust antagonist against Google here in the U.S. They were probably the main instigator of the U.S. Justice Department's antitrust suit over Google that just had a verdict around its search distribution contracts. And the guilty verdict against Google probably stands to benefit Microsoft's Bing most of anyone. So I think one of the things you see here is Google punching back and saying, look, Microsoft's contracts lock in cloud customers in the same way. And there are even some echoes of Microsoft's late 90s antitrust case, because that also had to do with Microsoft's contractual terms preventing customers from using alternatives. Google is making the same allegations here.
Adam, as we're thinking about where this could net out in terms of how these companies have to define the partnerships that they're also kind of working towards, I mean, could there be a strategic shift that we see these companies have to enact in their cross-border relationships even?
Well, again, I think it's difficult. I mean, again, the cloud computing is frankly an area that antitrust enforcers probably haven't paid that much attention to. It's a little hard for them to see, to wrap their arms around, but it's really important. It's a big business. It's a growing business. Microsoft's actually the number 2 in that space, behind AWS. But I think, but it has a real impact. And part of Google's argument is that European customers have actually been bearing the financial brunt of not being able to transfer their services between different cloud, their data between different cloud providers in Europe. And so, this is going to be an interesting test about whether antitrust enforcers feel inclined to roll up their sleeves and care and take a closer look at the cloud computing market, which they haven't done to date.
Adam, another story that we've been closely watching is Intel's potential takeover. A report earlier this week revealed Qualcomm is exploring a takeover in Intel, looking into the antitrust side of things. What is the likelihood that this deal could even happen, and could this ever go through?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think this will be a fascinating test because on the one hand, the Biden administration has carved out a very clear industrial policy saying we want to be, supporting U.S. semiconductor manufacturing. That's something Intel's obviously in very tough straits right now, and this deal could really provide an important lifeline. Basically, also make it easier for help the U.S. compete against foreign competitors. On the other hand, it would be a big price tag deal, and the DOJ and the FTC have taken, have really raked those deals over the coals and blocked several of those deals. So I think in some ways it's a little bit of a test of the competing mindsets of the Biden administration, of course, which is coming to an end. Maybe this becomes a question for a Harris or a Trump administration, but it puts those two competing values to war with each other. Do we care about, just the size of the deal, or do we care about beating other companies, other countries' companies?
Adam, the conversations that you've been having, I'm just so curious, how are executives thinking about the M&A landscape, given the election, given the uncertainty, and given the fact that if Harris were to be in the White House, the environment here for some of these larger deals, it might not change just in terms of their favor too much?
Well, as you talked about earlier, Vice President Harris is giving a big economic speech in Pittsburgh today, and I have been very encouraged by the tone that she's taken about business, which is that, as a politician, she has not prioritized going after business. And actually, some of the comments she's been making on the trail, and I think we'll make today, talk about business as a partner. And so, I don't see her prioritizing kind of hostility towards business. I think there's also a good argument that, M&A activity is good for the virtuous cycle of investment in startups, that, when one company gets acquired, it creates capital that then helps the next startup get started. And that we've seen, challenges in the startup market because of that. I actually think she's going to be very sympathetic to that because she wants to see new companies arise, and to the extent the M&A policy of the Biden administration has actually hurt startup growth, I suspect that's something she's gonna really hear and listen to and probably take action on. I don't see her being wedded to also the personnel that Biden has had in these positions either.